Shiva, I think when Walter joins, you can start streaming or recording.
Yes, sir.
So when you are asking questions, please see that they are within the material that is conveyed to the participants by Walter. So within those lecture notes or videos, that topic has been discussed, but you couldn't understand it completely. Those you can ask. If anyone has anything to share, please.
Yeah, Dharmender sir, I have shared one question.
Yes, we have noted.
So,
Yes, sir.
did you see it?
We have seen.
Yeah, it is within the portion, within the what Walter has explained, but I am fully not say aware of this externality in the context of as per economics it is okay, but as per natural farming, what is the externality? I want to listen in detail. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So I think we'll invite him. I think Walter is already here. Please.
Hello, Walter. Welcome to the Q&A session for Module 2. Walter, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome, Walter, for the
I've
Q&A
got
session.
video now, right? Excellent. Okay, there we are. We've got the video and right, excellent. I'll just smooth the screen behind me a little bit. Right. Okay, good. Right, how's everybody been? Greetings.
Good afternoon. So everyone is doing fine. Yesterday was our Independence Day.
Yes, I was just about to say 75 years of independence after 200 years of your rule. And obviously, yeah, it's growing from strength to strength. So, no, excellent. Congratulations to India and all the young people in India. 600 million young people in India under 30 years of age. So, big future.
Yes. Thank you. So I think almost everybody has joined. Shall we start the session?
Yes, I mean, okay. It's basically it's still 2:45 here, or it's still 15 minutes early.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. Is Ben connected from Australia here?
Hasn't yet.
He hasn't yet. Okay, well, look, let's just give it another
we'll wait
5
for-
minutes and then we can start, right? Because in case there's somebody that wants to come in from this end, because they were all expecting it at 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Time, but it's still 15 minutes to go. But yeah, otherwise we can start early because that gives us a little bit more time for answering questions. And I appreciate that. I mean, from reviewing the past, I'm probably trying to answer the questions in too much detail, so I can try and keep them a bit simpler and shorter, my answers. And also what will happen, you see, is that we're going through the introduction now, but we're going to go into more detail on each of the topics like biofertility and what have you as we go through the program. And so if people haven't got all the answers or all the full understanding now, don't worry, we'll come into more detail on it as we go through the 10 different modules, right?
Okay.
So we'll have a module on, the sponge, on hydrology, on biofertility. And in those, we can talk about details much, much more, because at the moment, we're still providing the overview.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to share with you that for the next module, we'll be receiving content from Ben shortly in a few hours. This module is
yes,
already with you.
And he sent it. He
Yes,
sent
he
it
has sent
already.
it. Okay. So we
Good.
are again meeting tomorrow, the next day, to introduce that content.
Good, good.
And also, we are designing some assignments around the topics. So,
excellent. What we've done is, you see, we started off the first module with why this natural farming is so important. This one, the Q&A is talking about last week's module that we set on what we need to do, the targets, the specific targets. And then the one coming through that Ben has just sent is some of the how to do it, like what the how issues are. And then we'll break and go into each of the how issues in detail, right? Sponge, water, fertility, resilience, productivity, all the different topics. So no, look, it's all good. But never hesitate. I mean, obviously, that's the other thing. We're getting some very, very good questions coming up, very deep questions. And thank you very much for that. And what we're doing is we're making a note of those, because then at the end we can say, right, what is further information, fact sheets and what have you that we may wish to produce and present regarding each of those topics. Or in some of them, we even say, look, is this something that a masterclass, a subsequent masterclass wants to really discuss in great detail? For example, the question came up, what is resilience? And of course, that's very important, but really it may need a longer specific debate, full hour on resilience, what it is and how to achieve it. Okay, well, look, basically all set to go. So what is it now? 10 to 2. So when you're ready, just let me know, please.
Yes, actually, from our side, Diksha will be posing those questions that been collected first, and those that we get in the chat box. So you don't need to go through the chat box to answer.
No, yeah, good. I can't actually see all the chat. Well, I mean, the chat box comes up, but then it disappears, so I can't come in. Look, Ben has just indicated he's standing by, so Ben's on board, right?
He'll be promoted to panelist shortly.
Okay.
We're waiting for Ben to join. Has he joined?
Not
Okay, he has indicated he's standing by, but I think perhaps if you just let him in, right?
we can't see him in the waiting room.
Okay.
Please share a direct link.
Okay. Ben has just signaled, yeah, that he's still thinking we're starting in 10 minutes, right? So he's sending me. I'll just. No, I don't want. Actually, I don't want to get out of this, but I mean, yeah, you'll give him perhaps 5 more minutes and see if he can join in. Yeah.
Sure. So during the lectures or other curated content, there are certain topics that are referred by the speaker. So we are also giving some assignments on that so that we understand those concepts deeply. And
Good.
also, while we are collecting questions, we are not restricting to that module itself. 50% of the questions will be restricting to the module. The other 50%, eventually, when you cover that topic in detail, that would help you where we are in that.
Yes. Look, thank you very much. And that's really important that you sort of put the questions that are really relevant to the people on the ground, not just from the modules that we've done. Because if there's areas that we haven't covered adequately in the modules, we need to hear through the questions, what the needs are.
Okay.
Because then we can extend, the information and provide that. So it's very much, open questions. Yeah.
We'll be sharing the assignment topics also with you for your understanding.
Please, yes. No, that's going to be very helpful too, because, it's all very much us learning as well what you're receiving and how relevant it is, but also are there other topics that we haven't covered well enough, right?
Okay, great. Diksha, please note that we have to communicate to Walter even previous assignment topics also.
Yes. Ben has joined the call. Welcome, Ben, to Q&A of Module 2.
Right, excellent.
Welcome, Ben.
I think we can start the Q&A.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much, Diksha. And look, thank you very much. Welcome again to this Q&A. But before we start, congratulations, India, on 75 years after independence. And in a sense, the progress you've made in that 75 years, not just in agriculture, although agriculture is critical because at the end of the day, it's agriculture, food, social stability that really governs the future, but also the economic development that's happened over the last 75 years, particularly the last 20 or so. But even that economic development will very much be based on agriculture. It'll be based on eco-enterprises that young people in India are going to be taking on board because of the agricultural productivity and innovation that natural farming in a large part is going to bring to India. So basically, natural farming, a key part of India's future, and obviously more so in the future. There's over 1.4 billion people now in India, or very quickly approaching that, and will overtake China as the world's most populous nation. But the really significant thing is that there are over 600 million young people, basically below the age of 30. And these are really the power for India's future. But of course, critical to them and their future is securing the water, the food, the biosystems, and the social stability that they need to survive with. And that's in a sense where you and us and natural farming is really in the premium position, because without this natural farming revolution, without going beyond the green revolution into natural farming futures, then those 600 million young people will have so many fewer options. But if we do it well, if we really build it well, then I think enormous opportunity for India's youth out of natural farming and the eco enterprises and the market opportunities that creates. Okay, so look, now coming back to the actual masterclass series, obviously we've had module 1 where we were talking about why natural farming is critically important. And last week, of course, you've been reading through module 2, the actual what we need to do. The what is really looking at what are the actual targets, the specific targets that we need to achieve through natural farming to achieve and help India sort of address its future. And so this masterclass Q&A now is really about looking at, the questions that are arising, the discussion that is arising from your looking at that. What are the targets? Are there better targets, additional targets, or aspects of those targets? Before we get started, I should say that thank you very much for the questions in the past. They've been very, very deep and meaningful. And I think I've been trying to answer them in too much detail, so we may not have been able to get through enough questions in the Q&A. So I apologize, that may be my fault. But basically, we will be coming back onto these different issues in detail later on in the masterclass series. So at this stage, we're scoping out why, what, how, the priorities, setting the priorities, and then we'll be looking in greater detail at how do we rehydrate landscapes, how do we enhance biofertility, how do we enhance nutritional integrity and health. So we'll be going to each of those aspects in greater detail in the later modules. So even though we're raising them now, and it's no problems, we can raise them now, later on we can get more in detail. If there's things that we don't understand from my answers now, please note them, and then we can readdress and visit them again in the later modules. Okay, so basically module 2 looked at the question of targets. What is it that natural farming needs to achieve for India, basically to help in its development? And of course, very simply, the summary that we gave in that module, yes, we need to secure water security, because obviously that's critical for simply survival. Everybody needs a minimum of 2 liters per person per day, just for physiological needs, but probably 10 to 50 liters per person a day if you include cleaning and other requirements. And the real issue is, how do we actually secure water for basically the 63% of India, which is still living in distributed villages all around India? So how do we secure that water essential from natural farming, landscape regeneration across India at a village level? And of course, that was the point that Dr. Reddy, the Chief Minister from Andhra Pradesh, raised as a very key issue for this masterclass and for natural farming. Can we secure the water autonomy, the water security for villages right across Andhra Pradesh and then India through using natural farming as a strategic tool? And that in itself becomes a very, very important strategic target and objective. We're not addressing it in the masterclass specifically, but certainly it warrants a much, much more detailed planning analysis agenda. just going on before, otherwise we'll run out of time. Basically, the next issue is looking at food security, and we're seeing outstanding results on that, where people are achieving higher quality yields, more reliable through natural farming. But then also, how does this help the social stability of those people, the farmers in the villages? And again, natural farming is outstanding, partly through the women's self-help group, but just the social coordination and organization, providing that, that social stability. And basically, this is now, again, an extremely important aspect, because it's those social groupings, the self-help groups, that local empowerment of grassroots action, because India, through that, has perhaps one of the best opportunities to catalyze widespread change. Most societies, while they recognize they need to address these water food challenges, their industrial structures, their social structures don't allow them to do this. And they're sort of really trapped in the inertia of their political system. They don't have the same village structure. Mostly in Australia, for example, fewer than 10% of people are on the land. And so, this grassroots opportunity for regeneration, revitalization isn't there. So look, that's, again, a target for India. How do we actually achieve this social change through this village strategy? Biologically, we ask the question, what are the actual ecological regeneration outcomes that India needs to achieve? And obviously, that's clearly understood. We need to re-embrace nature. We've got to re-embrace the natural processes, which is, of course, what natural farming is all about. And of course, that all involves regenerating the Earth's soil carbon sponge. We'll come into that in great detail in a later module. And of course, as we accept that natural, as in nature, regenerating those landscapes really all focuses on photosynthesis, on plant growth, on maximizing plant growth, because it's that plant growth that gives you the carbon, that gives you the biomass, the energy from which you can do the regeneration. The other thing that I think, in terms of targets that natural farming in India is really epitomized and demonstrated excellently, is the fact that the biggest resource that we have got, which we haven't used in conventional agriculture, is in fact the issue of time. See, it's not a matter how fast we grow things, how big we grow things, it's about how long we grow things. For how long can we keep growth sustained? And so the whole focus in natural farming on 365-day green growth is, again, a very powerful productivity dividend, but also very powerful target and tool we need to foster, because if we can keep things growing for longer, that's more valuable than growing things faster, bigger, with, for example, artificial inputs. And of course, then biologically, again, we've got to look at the water issue, like every 100 raindrops, how do we use them? Again, we'll have a masterclass looking specifically at that rehydration of landscapes. We've got to look at the biofertility of those soils that we're regenerating. Again, we'll have a masterclass specifically on that. And then, of course, we'll have another one looking at the actual nutritional integrity of the food that we're producing through natural farming. Again, it's right under the radar at the moment. It's not being recognized. You're not getting premium prices, but it's often the critical issue, because that's the thing that governs the resilience of communities, their preventative health. And in a sense, again, it's potentially strategically going to put India in a very much more beneficial position compared to a lot of other societies whose food quality is compromised because of the lack of nutritional integrity. We'll have another masterclass specifically on that. Okay, and then of course we can look at, in terms of targets, what does natural farming need to do as far as targets? And we come on to some of these critical social performance measures. So it's not just growing plants, it's not just growing food, but it's actually growing and revitalizing healthy village social structures and communities. And the biggest one in that is, of course, the question of autonomy. How autonomous are then the villages? Are they vulnerable and dependent on supply chains? Are they vulnerable, dependent on artificial inputs from outside? Are they dependent and vulnerable on government subsidies and protection? And if we can avoid all of those and make them more resilient, independent, autonomous, then strategically these villages and their agro-ecosystems become world-class, powerful demonstrators for what has to happen. As part of that autonomy, it goes hand in hand, is actually the question of empowering youth. Okay, as we said, there's 600 million young people under 30 in India. We need to generate 10 million plus jobs every year. And yes, those jobs are there in agricultural regeneration, agroecology, eco-enterprises associated with natural farming. So we see the potential of these villages and the eco-enterprises that young people can get involved with in things like biofertilizers, marketing chains, services. There's enormous autonomous economic revitalization potential, job potential from this natural farming. And in a sense, that's going to be perhaps one of the biggest social benefits of natural farming in India. If we can realize it, well, we will realize it. That's our target. But really, that will do so much more in terms of social benefit than basically anything else, because 10 million jobs, new jobs every year, would otherwise be very hard to find. And see, all of these things then socially basically build the resilience of basically Indian society, Indian agro-ecosystems. And that resilience is going to be critical because as we know, climate change, climate extremes, market uncertainty, even political uncertainty, as that increases, the resilience and autonomy of a village economy and a village supply chain becomes extremely valuable and gives India a very, very strong position for its future. Okay, so the other thing in terms of targets, the last part that we addressed briefly was the question of, well, what do we need to actually focus on to catalyze, to extend this change? And obviously there's things like, yes, we need the evidence, the case studies, and obviously we're doing that now. The work that BJ's done in documenting the case studies, outstanding. Every week we're seeing more and more good case studies coming up through the WhatsApp information. We've got to actually take some of these case studies, not just look at them in the field, but then say, what are the benefits? What are the economic? What are the social benefits? We've got to look at new metrics that actually define those benefits, because we're going to have to change the whole debate from the simplistic, GDP performance measures that most economies go on, and really saying here are new metrics for actually resilience, productivity, sustainability. And then, of course, we need to put these narratives out there. Look, here are the stories, telling the stories of the powerful outcomes from natural farming and how it has taken India beyond the Green Revolution to a new secure water, food, social future. And so that's, in a sense, again, an important target out of this whole natural farming, making the narratives. And so basically, it all comes down to, in a sense, you guys, where are the young people? Where are the mentors? Where are the catalysts? And how do we actually train and empower and help inform and support young people who can then be the mentors that go out catalyzing, extending these changes? We obviously can't do it in every village, but if we can demonstrate the whole power of natural farming on representative villages, and then we can train enough young people through these master classes as mentors, then the potential is to extend this right across India, and more you'll find other countries coming in. So look, that's basically is a summary of what this module number 2 on what we have to do, the targets, is about. But look, let's open it for questions, right?
Yes. Diksha, can you pose the first question?
Thank you, Walter, for that wonderful summary and elucidating about the current issues in natural farming, and along with that, providing solutions also, and what we as youth need to do to take this revolution forward. So we have talked to our participants and we have accumulated some questions. So I'll start with the first question. The Quanta magazine article suggests even humus is quickly decomposed and the oxidation of soil carbon is underestimated largely in devising carbon sequestration strategies. How should we understand soil carbon? As a stock or as a flow? How should we view recalcitrant carbon? We can think of recalcitrant carbon maybe like biochar. So this was the question.
Okay, well, look, thank you. Very important and good question. We'll come on to that in a little bit more detail when we're talking about the sponge, but let's just address it. Yes, carbon in soils is basically a dynamic, so it's a flow, and then it's a dynamic of 2 processes, both carbon oxidation, which means we're losing carbon, turning it back to CO2, effectively burning it off either by fire or microbially to CO2, and then carbon fixation or sequestration as stable soil carbon through microbial processes. So it's like a bathtub. It's a matter of how much carbon is coming in and then how much carbon is leaking out through this oxidation process. And we've just got to basically manage all of those to say, over time, are we accumulating more and more carbon in the soil? Because as we do, we enhance its productivity, its resilience, its biofertility, etc. So the carbon sequestration challenge is really more complicated than just fixing carbon. And we'll go into this in detail. It's basically maximizing its fixation by maximizing plant growth, but then limiting the amount of oxidation of that carbon so that we are keeping more of it in the soil and we're turning more of it microbially into stable humus and stable glomalin, which can stay in that soil for 100 to 1,000 years. Okay, so it's really this balance between the loss of carbon and its fixation. And the powerful story is that we control both of those processes. We control them through our land management. And so that's where wise natural farming land management comes in. At the moment, our industrial agriculture, green revolution agriculture, is extremely oxidative. So it's extremely geared towards burning carbon out of soil and mostly losing most of the carbon or even some of the natural carbon that was in the soil and turning it into CO2. And as a result, soils are losing their structure, their carbon content, and with that structure, they're losing their water holding capacity, hydrology, biofertility, etc., stability, etc. And so what we've got to do is do as nature does, try to ensure that at least 60% of the carbon fixed by plants is invested in stable soil carbon. And of course, we can do that by other management practices like the natural farming that we're now embracing. And that basically turns, 60% plus of that carbon into humate or glomalin, these stable 100-year plus carbon sources. Now, innovative land management all over the world, innovative leaders are readily doing 10 tons of carbon per hectare per annum, sequestering that in the soil. So in a very rapid way, rebuilding healthy soils, very much rebuilding soil carbon. But again, as we're saying, this is contrast with the oxidative industrial farming, which is losing carbon from the soil. So that's part of the whole thing. How do we switch people from the past industrial practices, green revolution practices, where we were losing carbon, to where we can actually enhance up to 10 tons of carbon per hectare per annum? And yeah, that's in a sense not the secret, but that's the change that we have to sort of actually engender. And we'll be talking about building the soil carbon sponge, which will go through the exact mechanisms and processes of that. Just one last thing about carbon sequestration. Of course, now because of we have carbon emissions accounting, right? We have to account for carbon emissions, all nations globally. And so there's often a carbon price. You can often get paid for stable carbon that you've sequestered, including in soils. And that can become quite valuable, right? So that depending on the markets and the location, but people are basically getting paid up to $50 per ton of CO2 fixed in their soils. And so this becomes another very, very valuable, viable income for natural farming operatives, farmers that are doing it, because they're not just getting better crops, more resilient crops, but they'll also be being paid for the carbon they sequester in their soils. And that price may often be more valuable than the actual price of the food commodities that they're producing. So, look, important questions. We'll come on to it a little bit more. I think it's about module 5, the whole carbon sponge story. But I hope that in the interim answers that question.
Thank you, Walter. We'll go towards the second question.
Yes.
What are the biotic, atmospheric, and edaphic factors influencing carbon sequestration? Do tropical landscape lose carbon from the soil easily as compared to temperate ones?
Right. Okay. Look, this comes very much into the previous questions where we're saying what are the actual biological, physical processes and factors that drive it, particularly in tropical lands. And obviously tropical lands, tropical soils, because of higher temperatures, they often have a higher microbial activity. And so if you've got a very oxidative system, you can burn off or lose carbon much more rapidly. And so it's often harder to build soil carbon in tropical soils if you're using high input oxidative industrial farming systems. Conversely, nature in tropical lands basically have evolved highly, highly efficient systems of fixing carbon. And so this is, in a sense, what the natural farming process seek to do. They can have very high carbon fixation rates because they can grow so much more plant growth. So, for example, sugarcane can grow up to 200 tons of carbon per hectare per annum, through its production. So that's a prodigious quantity of carbon. And if we can keep half of that in the soils by natural farming processes, we can do 10 times higher carbon enhancement yields than we can through most temperate crops. So as long as we manage the tropical soils the right way, yes, we can actually fix very, very high levels of carbon, but we have to be particularly careful to not induce this oxidation, this microbial oxidation. So very carefully looking at not using excessive fertilizers, not using excessive cultivation, certainly limiting the biocides, the poisons that kill the fungi that would be fixing the carbon. Very much Vijay's analysis going to 365 days a year green continual cropping rather than the bare fallow systems, the 70% red, 30% green that was in the traditional agriculture, because those are very, very highly oxidative processes. There's some stunning case studies in nature, of course, basically of country land, which was actually formed exclusively through this carbon sequestration. For example, in Kalimantan, that's Borneo, the old Borneo, basically where they turned rainforest into palm oil plantations. They'd clear the rainforest, and there was, of course, very rich, deep, organic carbon soils under those rainforests. But when they basically burnt that rainforest residue and wanted to establish palm oil, then in many cases they found that all the soil disappeared. They were back to being effectively underwater, below sea level, because the soil that had developed over the last 10,000 years was, very high carbon. So here's an example where nature had created very high, permanent, high carbon soils, very productive rainforest ecosystems, and basically had done that in a tropical environment. So I use that as an example. Yes, we can sequester high levels of carbon in tropical lands, but we've got to be very careful to limit the oxidation, the biological microbial oxidation by excessive fertilizers, etc. Next question.
Thank you, Walter. This question is from Trimurtilu, sir. So can you unmute yourself and ask the question, or should I ask the question on your behalf?
You ask, please.
What are the different approaches we can make to enrich mycorrhizal population in the natural farming fields?
Okay, yes, good. Okay, so we're looking particularly at mycorrhizal or just general micro, but it doesn't matter. It's covering the same space. Okay, so this actually again comes into the last two questions. So it's asking specifically, just as we must limit the oxidation, the burning off of carbon, what is it that we can do to enhance the microbial fixation of carbon to build these higher soil carbon levels? And again, very important question, very good question. The first thing to note is that basically plants already put some 60% of the carbon they fix through photosynthesis into their soils as roots and as root exudates, all right? So already 60% plus of the carbon that's fixed is going into soils. And so the challenge is really, how do we stimulate particularly the fungi that are important for turning those plant waste, the roots, the litter, the exudates, into stable soil carbon. And there's two main groups of activity or fungi that do this. The first are the higher basidiomycetes, the higher fungi, and they're basically very important in breaking down cellulose and lignin and polymerizing it into very large, complex humate molecules, humus molecules. So they're actually just breaking down cellulose lignin and then gluing these molecules together into extremely large, complex, but stable humus materials. And this is, in a sense, when we're talking about Kalimantan, that's in a sense what created, these deep organic soils, 10, 15 meters deep in the space of 9,000 years. So prodigious carbon fixation through these basidiomycete fungi. We can actually, they occur naturally, so we don't have to introduce them, but we can basically stimulate them by certain processes. That varies from place to place, but I'll come into a second. And basically but the biggest thing is not oxidize them, right? So they're the things that get oxidized. The other key pathway for fixing carbon microbially in soil or stimulating it is through actually the mycorrhizal fungi. Okay, plants' roots exude up to 30, 40% of their sugars as root exudates, and these are normally dominated by the mycorrhizal fungi that then grow from the roots throughout the soil and create this very prolific mycorrhizal fungal network throughout the whole soil system. And again, it's turning about 30% of the carbon into this fungal network, which then leaves behind cell walls, which then again are microbially converted to substance we call glomalin, which is a glue, stable carbon glue that holds aggregates and holds soils together. So between humates and this glomalin formation, that is these are the dominant microbial carbon fixation processes. And we can stimulate them. And one of the best ways to stimulate them is actually, again, through a third process, and that is herbivores. That's bringing animals, not just big animals, but worms, insects, what have you, into that biosystem. And it's the excreta of these worms and insects that are very stimulatory to these fungal activities, these humate glomalus forming processes. But the animals, of course, are also valuable in converting dry litter that's above the ground and would otherwise burn, and actually breaking that litter down into stable soil carbon, digesting it in their guts, whether it's termites or rumen, cattle or sheep with rumen, and turning it from just dead, dry litter, cellulose lignin, again into biofertilizer and humates. So there's three dominant processes. They're all governed by microbial ecologies, but they're all governed by our management of our natural farming system. And what you're seeing with natural farming, for example, Vijay is demonstrating that, or the farmers are demonstrating wonderfully, where now we've got lots of extra crop growth. We're harvesting the seed. We've got a lot of the stubble, a lot of the stalks left behind. We're now bringing the cows into the paddocks to eat that stalk, to eat that biomass, and turn it into biofertilizer and stable humus, while at the same time preparing the seed bed or the soil for regrowth. So here, as nature designed it, very highly efficient processes for not just biofertilizing the soil, but putting carbon into the soil from what would otherwise be litter, the stalks of crop plants that would otherwise just be burnt off. So again, three very key microbial processes for enhancing soil carbon sequestration and soil carbon levels. Next question.
Next question is by Aditi. Aditi, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or I can ask it on your behalf.
I'll do it, Diksha. Hi, Walter. I wanted to know what is the difference between regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture. We're talking quite a bit about this. Or in other words, what are the main pointers which distinguish these two forms of agriculture?
Okay, look, a very important question. This is important because you'll get a lot of debate and discussion, and then, of course, it's often not very productive, you see. But the definition is very simple. I mean, we've not gone into regenerative agriculture or organic. We've gone, let's say, look, here is natural farming. Here are natural processes. And in a sense, that embraces both of them, right? Organic agriculture was defined very much initially in Europe from people who say, look, this is agriculture and we don't want to use artificial fertilizers and we don't want to use biocides, these toxic insecticides, fungicides, weedicides. Okay, and so they defined organic agriculture very much in agriculture without using, fertilizers and biocides, as natural as possible. And that's very well and good. And basically it works mostly, very well, not mostly, but often if there's something that's limiting in terms of nutrition, for example, then it is necessary and totally valid to add that nutrient. You don't have to add it as a chemical nutrient. You can add it as a rock mineral or, complement it in that way. Or you can use mulches and compost to provide that back. So organic agriculture can become a little bit limiting, whereby people are saying, I'm restrained, I can't do these additions because the rules don't apply. They're human rules rather than natural rules, right? What's also happened with organic agriculture, it's really quite tragic in America, because they then defined it as, okay, no fertilizer, no biocides. Now industry has moved in on the organic label and sort of said, okay, if we grow plants hydroponically, completely artificial, but hydroponically, and we don't use fertilizer, but we just use nutrients, artificial nutrients, then basically we can go under the organic label. And so now in America, they're actually completely compromising the intent and the value of the organic label, because in industry is just exploiting it as a brand, selling product with a higher price, labeling it organic, but growing it is just as artificially as if they would in a chemical system. So in a sense, the organic has been compromised in that way. Regenerative agriculture tries to, in a sense, bypass all of that and saying, look, we're not focused on practices, we're focused basically on rebuilding the health of the soil, the viability, the resilience, and the productivity of that agricultural system. So as long as those are the outcomes that we're achieving, then basically the inputs and practices that achieve it in a sustainable way can be incorporated under regenerative. So it's often not as dogmatic, as dictatorial as far as you can do this and you can't do that. It's much more outcomes focused. But it's, again, using the same principles of maximizing plant growth, minimizing the oxidation of that to build soil carbon, minimizing the use of biocides so we're not killing things, and enhancing the nutritional integrity of the food produced. But really, so there's the differences in that. I mean, they're just shades of definition. Of course, in the West, you've had groups, coming up. I mean, there's a whole lot of different groups: biological farming, biodynamic farming, organic farming, regenerative farming. And they're just different advocates, but they're all, in a sense, fitting under the natural farming bigger label that, in a very wise way, India has adopted, because it's actually doing the right thing for that local situation. It's really going to each situation, looking at what's happening, understanding what's limiting the growth of plants in that system, and then saying, what can I do that's natural to alleviate those limitations, and as a result, getting more productive, more resilient, higher nutritional integrity food from those systems. So I hope that helps define it, but it is a lot to do with labeling. And in America or in the West, it's very much because organic food has in the past had a premium. And of course, it's actually using that brand, that name, as a marketing tool for industrial food now to try and capture the same premium, even though the quality of that food may not meet the standards. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter.
I would request Dr. Pushpa to ask the next question.
Good afternoon, Walter, sir. My question is, can you able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. We are growing many types of crops at one field. We are preferring to grow polycropping system.
Yes.
So as a part of biodiversity of plants as well as microorganisms, we are preferring this method, and also regeneration of water. Does the available nutrients produced by the microorganisms or whatever the methods we are following are going to be sufficient for all the crops? Or is there any nutrient demand will occur? That is my doubt.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. And a good question, very important question. Yes, look, basically, obviously, plants have shoots above the ground and then roots below the ground. And different root systems will then, depending on the species of the plant, exploit different parts of the soil stratum, right? Some will be shallow, fast growing, others will be deeper, slower growing. And so we've got the potential architecturally to actually design an optimum root colonization of a soil using many different species of intercrop mixed plants, right? So you could imagine we could put 10 different species of plant in there, and rather than all competing with each other, they are all occupying different spaces in the soil. And in a sense, while they will compete a little bit, but not as much as, I mean, we're going to get better growth all up. We might get 300% growth response from using that soil more efficiently. Secondly, those roots will actually help each other often. While they may be competing for some things, water and what have you, they can also help each other, because one plant might be particularly good at having microbes in its roots that are solubilizing phosphorus or breaking down other things and making nutrients available for the other plants as well. Okay, so that they have a synergistic, beneficial effect in terms of providing better nutrition, making more nutrients available, and also cycling nutrients faster, right? And that's what, of course, happens in a rainforest. Very diverse, mixed species, but lots of species, but the roots are all living synergistically, helping each other. They can also help each other enormously valuably through protecting the plants from diseases, pests and diseases. Because if there's a diverse mixed population, then it's almost impossible for any one disease or pest to get established, because, you know, their food substance, only 1 in 10 or 1 in 15 plants is edible, right? And so basically they can't have a pandemic explosion of disease, which is what, of course, we suffer with when we have crop failures. So they're very, very beneficial in protecting that crop from disease. Now, the question is, if you have 15 plants, will they run out of nutrients? And yes, that's true. I mean, a soil, any cubic meter of soil will contain a fixed quantity of nutrients. And yeah, if you have more plants growing faster, then yes, you can exploit those nutrients faster. But on to that is truth, you've got to also add the other truth, that as litter falls onto that cubic meter of soil, and we've got more biodiversity, more roots, more organisms, that litter is, and the nutrients in that litter is cycling so much faster. And this is critically important when we look at biofertility. See, because 80% plus of biofertility isn't related directly to the quantity of nutrients, it's related to the availability of nutrients. And where we have nutrients that are cycling faster and becoming available faster, then we can maintain highly productive biosystems, even if we've only got a limited quantity of nutrient, because each nutrient is used and cycled so much faster. And for example, in Australia, but also in India, we've got rainforest, often on very, very, very poor soils. But those rainforests are so productive because they're so rapidly cycling nutrients in that root microbial ecology world. And so this is something really exciting about natural farming, intercropping, multi-species, cropping system, because we're going beyond the concept, the Green Revolution concept, that we've got to add nutrients to make fertility. We can enhance fertility by increasing the availability, the cycling, and the actual synergy of those, the use of those nutrients across that field. So yes, we can enhance that nutrient. It can grow a lot better because of it. But at the end of the day, we can't mine the soil. We can't just take nutrients away forever and expect the soil to sustain. We've got to bring nutrients back onto the soil. And actually that is just finishing that answer. That's why village agriculture is so wonderful and powerful, because see, all those nutrients in the food gets used by people for their sustenance, for their viability and growth. And of course, most of the nutrients are then excreted by those people, the animals and the people eating it. And as long as we're bringing those nutrients back onto the soil, into this multi-diverse microbial ecology, we can perpetuate fertilities forever. And in fact, globally, it's really significant because there's countries, India, China, Korea, Japan, and see, they've been able to sustain very high populations for thousands of years. China, over 500 million people for 4,000 years, because they've recycled these nutrients and maintained highly active microbial cycling processes. So yes, we can maintain productivity, we can enhance productivity through these microbial biofertility processes. We can do that through intercropping, multi-cropping, and then looking after the microbial ecology of those soils. I hope that answers it. And next question, please.
The next question is, what are important externalities in natural farming that natural farming addresses?
Okay, look, I'll answer this. I mean, it's such an important question, but it really is one of the key things at the end of this whole masterclass series, right? Because externalities are, in fact, values or costs that we have not included on the balance sheet, we have not included in decision making, and instead we've externalized and put it onto somebody else's responsibility, right? So, for example, when we degrade our soil, then we externalize the cost of that degradation to the environment and our children's future, because they will not have fertile soils with which to grow food, with which to survive. Okay, so we've externalized the consequence of our action, our responsibility to our future generations or to nature. And of course, it's totally irresponsible, but it's also totally fraudulent. And I don't want to be radical, but basically our industrial economics and our industrial agriculture has been based all on fraudulent externalities, fraudulent accounting. Okay, because when we basically subsidize the electricity to pump water from the deepest aquifers so that we drain the aquifers, we've in a sense externalized that subsidized power cost. We've also externalized the consequences of depleting those aquifers. Okay, so here, by a simple policy where we're protecting or subsidizing, distorting a natural process, we've had two externalities. We've had the taxpayer paying for the electricity, and we've had the environment paying for the lost aquifer, and we've got another externality: the future generations won't have water in the aquifers and they can collapse and die. So these are enormous costs, and we're not including them in the balance sheet. And so this is really the criminal neglect that our current economic system has designed into itself, because basically it can all work, but we've got to look at all the valid costs, all the valid returns, and then look at what system is most productive. And of course, by externalizing the majority of the costs, the majority of the consequences, we are basically completely misleading and destroying ourselves. Another wonderful example, no, it's not wonderful, it's horrible example, but a very powerful example is, for example, we've been growing industrial food. That food has less than a third of the nutrient content and often none of the essential trace elements that we need for our preventative health, which we formerly got through the natural farming of those foods. Okay, so our food is now totally compromised in its nutritional integrity. And because of that, we are seeing an explosion of diseases, self-induced diet diseases, industrial societies. You know, the cancers, the diabetes, the cardiac, the autoimmune, you know, all these massive, expensive, debilitating diseases that are occurring, particularly in Western societies. And of course, these are all externalized costs, aren't they? The cost of those diseases is directly attributable to the compromised food. You know, and of course, we're not including it in the cost of that food. We're not including it in the decision-making, the stupidity of growing that food that way. Because if we did include those medical costs, which are greater than the actual whole industrial food production system, if we included them onto that food production system, then we would never even dream of doing it. And so for natural farming, this is actually so critical, because natural farming doesn't externalize. It actually basically identifies all the real factors, all the real costs, and makes a conclusion to say, yes, here I have a fully accounted, fully costed, beneficial farming production system. And that's, in a sense, its power. And of course, that's why it is so superior long-term strategically compared to industrial farming. That's why India, you know, you've had sort of basically 40, 50 years of experience, green revolution, high input, more on agriculture, but you've seen the externality costs of that in terms of pollution, suicide, drained aquifers, degraded soils, social instability. And if you add all those costs on, they're the things that green revolution agriculture has created. But now we can go beyond the green revolution. We can take those people and say, no, here is a wiser natural farming system where we don't externalize, we internalize those costs, and the balance sheet is so much more compelling, beneficial for India's future. Okay, I hope that sort of starts it, but yes, we'll be coming back to that at one of the last modules in the masterclass.
Thank you, Walter, for addressing an important question about externalities. This Q&A has been very informative, but due to time constraints, next one will be the last question. I would request Prachi to ask the last question.
Okay, so thank you, Diksha. So sir, I have I have two questions, but I think one question you have partially answered, so I'll go with the first one. So in this polycropping system, we were trying to measure the dry litter, which is getting added into the soil, and the crop leaf litter covering the soil. So let's say in April month, we have understood that 20% of the area is covered in polycropping system when few rows are of monocrop followed by intercrop rows of mixed cropping, Navdhanya system basically. So I'm going through the literature, but I'm not able to understand how much effective this crop dry leaf litter is adding to the soil, and this cover is making an impact on the soil. So that part is not clearly understood from the literature which is available, because many studies are there in terms of forest, rainforest conditions, many literature I'm finding in terms of forest conditions, not in the farm condition.
Yeah. Look, thank you very much. And again, a very, very important, intelligent question. And it comes back very much into, first of all, those externalities, because you're now asking, look, here is the value. What is the effect of cropping on soil heating, exposure? You know, what are the consequences and costs of that? No, nobody has taken that into the account at all, into the calculation. So be brave, be very brave, because you're actually doing it for the first time. So you won't find it in the literature, but don't give up. You just logically go through, document your argument, and we'll talk about it. And it's a very important, valid argument, but also it's an extremely important, interesting example, because what you brought up is just so powerfully important. Now, it comes back to the whole issue of climate change, right? Basically, if we have bare soil, it will heat up by the sun. And as we know, if you've got hot, dry, bare soil in Andhra Pradesh in the middle of summer, you can't walk on it. It's often 70 degrees on the surface, right? Centigrade. And because it's so hot, physics dictates it will re-radiate massive amounts of heat back into the air. Okay? By contrast, if you've got a polyculture with good soil cover, with good moisture holding capacity because it's got organic matter incorporated in it, that soil, because it's protected, shaded, moist, will rarely get above 25 degrees centigrade, right? And because its temperature is so much lower, it will re-radiate massively less heat back into the air. The physics defines that. It's the fourth power of the temperature. That's what governs the amount of heat re-radiated, but you don't have to go into the numbers. It's just colossally more heat is regenerated and re-radiated from dry, hot soils compared to cool, moist, covered soils. Now, we've never accepted this. I mean, the physics is absolutely clear. There's no dispute whatsoever. But the Earth's greenhouse effect is governed by two factors. It's governed by the amount of re-radiation that is being liberated by the Earth's surface times the percentage of that re-radiation that is absorbed by greenhouse gases, water vapor, 80%, CO2, 11%, methane and others, 9%. Okay, it's governed by the amount of re-radiation times the amount absorbed. And physics logic dictates that if we don't re-radiate heat back from soils because we keep them cool, moist, and covered, then effectively we can turn down the greenhouse effect instantly because gases can't absorb heat that hasn't been re-radiated, right? If we haven't re-radiated the heat, doesn't matter how many greenhouse gases we've got up there, they can't absorb it, they can't retain it because it hasn't been re-radiated in the first place. So what you're demonstrating through your multi-species cover crop cooling land surfaces is actually the planet's, humanity's only practical way to safely, naturally turn down the greenhouse effect and cool the planet's climate.
Okay.
Now, okay, I mean, if we go to the physics of this, and no question. So now the question comes to your question about externalities. So I ask you, India, 1.4 billion people, what is the value of survival of 1.4 billion Indians? Everything, you know, it's existential, isn't it? You know, the continued survival and life and health of 1.4 billion Indians. And of course, if that depends on cooling the planet, which it does, what is the value of what you've done in your natural farming by keeping your plants protecting and cooling that soil? Okay, and so it's not the yield of the crops you're getting from that soil that's the important thing. It's saving humanity from cooking in global warming. So you can send an invoice, you can send the bill to the global community to say, okay, what value is protecting not just India, but the whole planet from going overheating and collapsing? You see, and so these are the externalities, right? And this is the power of the externalities. And in a sense, what you're asking, or you're raising the debate, look, the benefits that I'm doing by these multi-species cover crop, protecting this land surface, is so profound in terms of climate mitigation, heating avoidance, cooling the planet, it's priceless. It's tons of rubies wouldn't match it, right? Okay, so it's priceless. And then you come back and see what BJ's been doing. You see, now we've said, can we actually use pre-monsoon dry seeding to extend these green covers over large areas of otherwise arid, dry, heating wasteland? Okay, can we use these natural farming pre-monsoon dry seeding strategy to regenerate, protect, cool 1 billion hectares of the 5 billion hectares of man-made desert and wasteland we've created on this planet in 8,000 years? And if we can do that, can we change the climate? And the answer is yes, we can. Can we restore the monsoon? Yes, we can. And so then the question is, what's the monsoon worth to India? Existential. Okay, so these are the change metrics, the change performance measures, the change benefits that you can deliver through natural farming. And these are the outcomes that we need to quantify with new metrics, with evidence, with narratives. And these are the things that will make natural farming, quite frankly, the savior for humanity, not just India, but all over the world. So again, this is almost a big concluding module 10 sort of, but that's how big it is. And that's how important your question and what you're doing is.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter.
Okay, look, I think that was the last question, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Well, look, you've got module 3 that Ben has sent down. And then basically, thank you very much. We'll go now, but then we'll pick up questions from module 3 next week, next Monday, again, I understand. But look, keep those questions coming. A lot of them are referring to bigger issues, as we talked about with externalities. But no, that's the power of the masterclass. That's the power of this whole University of Agroecology that India is leading with. And these are the issues that we can put into the world's agenda. And they're the only things that can now save humanity and the future. And India can have a very, very lead role in that through this natural farming that it's innovated. So thank you very, very much. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much. It has been a very valuable session for us. We look forward to having you next week again. Thank you so much, Walter.
Okay. All the best. Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Bye.
Participants, Ben has forwarded us module 3. We'll be sending out the module 3 shortly after this session ends.
Sure. So over to you, Diksha. Are we taking a pause here for 5 minutes before we go to breakout rooms?
Yes, I think we'll take a pause for 5 minutes. In breakout sessions, the group have to discuss. So I think we'll give them that 5 minutes break. Shiva, can you take over and talk about the breakout room?
Yes, one minute. Dharmendra.
Yes, sir.
Once you are through with this, sometime afternoon, please call me. Whenever you are.
Okay.
Yeah, all the participants, there is a Zoom link in your group discussion, WhatsApp group discussion. You can join from that group. I'm starting the call right now. After ending this call, I will start that call. Take 2 minutes and join the call.
If any of the participants are not added to WhatsApp groups already, please raise your hands. Prachi, are you there in one or the other groups?
Yes, I'm in group 1. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Fair enough.
We'll be putting the breakout session link in the main WhatsApp group for the masterclass.
So are the links group-wise posted in respective groups or in the main group?
It will be posted in the main group, and we have designed it in such a way that participants will automatically grow in their allotted subgroup.
Oh, great.
But it's very important that they log in through the email ID that they have sent us, that we have in our data.
Should we end this call for now, sir?
So we have to end this and join the other link, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So please join through a new link that is in the main group. You can leave this group now.